It's about looking back, the last interaction I've had with a member of staff, with a parent, with a student. If I can look back and say, I feel I was, true to myself and true to the philosophy of the school, which is shared by the school, then I've been successful as a principal.
Hello wonderful people, how's it going? It's Will here, and today we're in conversation with Chris Tooley. Chris, who started off as a science teacher, has now made his way to becoming a principal here in Cambridge. And today we're really fortunate to have a conversation because over the last year, obviously education has gone through a very turbulent time, and there's been a lot of decisions that many people would really struggle to make. And it's been really impressive to see from my end, and as a consequence, it really felt right that we had to have a conversation. So Chris, thank you so much for having a conversation with me today.
You're very welcome.
Okay, so first question I have to go for here is more to do with the pathway that you took to becoming a principal. So can you briefly talk to me how you came from being, a science teacher to now being the principal of a school?
Yeah, it really just started off with becoming a science teacher and aiming to be the best science teacher I could be. And then opportunities really just came their way. So I became an advanced skills teacher in 1999, and that was I think I was the 63rd in the country to achieve that, which gave loads of opportunities of going out of the school and supporting in primary schools, writing books, speaking at conferences. And it was very full on. After about 4 or 5 years, I'd tired of the task of doing all of that. Was a bit drained, became an assistant principal, then moved to be a deputy head teacher, and then was invited to come and lead Netherhall School in a bit of unsettled period in the school, and then invited to apply for the principal's job. So it's been a relatively traditional approach going through, with the advanced skills teacher element really being something on the side, which was really valuable in gaining perspective and reflection. It was good to step outside of the standard ladders for a period to experience other things.
What led you to make that decision then to go for that particular thing where you're stepping out of the, as you say, very sort of organised route to being a principal?
I'd like to think it was planned, but it absolutely wasn't. Very little in my life has been planned. It was a point in time where the opportunity arose. I was a second in charge of a science department at the time. I wanted to be the head of the faculty. It was my life's ambition to be head of faculty. It's the one job I've never done. And when that role was blocked and I couldn't actually proceed to it because of the incumbent, I chose to go sideways, and the opportunity came up, and I thought that it would be a good interim. Didn't really know what I was letting myself in for, which again is typical in the story of my career, but just went into it and really got an awful lot out of that process.
Yeah, I think sometimes making the sideways step can actually be really pivotal in a career, and actually really there's so much value in that, and clearly, as you've said, that it's something that remains fondly within your memory and probably has influenced your career going forward. But sort of around that topic of things that have really stuck out to you as an individual in your route to becoming a principal, beyond maybe just that experience, are there any other pivotal moments that you had which led you to becoming a principal?
I think again, I think the answer probably is no. I think I've never been driven to be a school principal. I've never been particularly driven in terms of where I wanted to get in education. What I've always done is whatever post I've been in, I've just really enjoyed it. And I've wanted to get the very most out of the opportunities to affect change. And when new opportunities have arisen that allow me to have an effect on things, I've gone for it. I've arrived. I've realised I couldn't do it. And then I've learned how to do it. And I failed, and then I've learnt from the failure, and then I've learnt to do better each time going through. So there has been no aim in my life to become a head teacher. It's something which I find myself doing now. It's something which I love doing. It's something which I find real pleasure and real motivation from. But it's certainly, there hasn't been a grand plan. The plan has just been about making the best out of each situation and trying to have the best impact.
That's really interesting to hear, because often there can be really two parallels to that story, where for some people it can be from the moment that they've become a teacher, it's all about what is the route that I can take to becoming the principal. But I think there's something really quite refreshing in that idea that it's not always about looking at the big picture, what is this going to lead to, but it's more about, I want to make progress, and I want to make progress in relation to what maybe is just beyond my capability. And clearly that's had quite a significant impact on each stage of your career and how you've been able to influence, in some real positive ways in a school environment.
I think that point you've said there is a really interesting one. And I think it's an interesting point just to consider, the point about just beyond my capability. And I think, there is a lie in this world that we tell ourselves. And the lie we tell ourselves is the word I. And when we say, I can't do this, and we have our view about ourselves, and we have our view about what our strengths are, we have our view of our limitations, and actually it's just a story. It's just a story that we tell ourselves. And one of the key things, I think, in terms of people moving forward is that recognition that is a lie, and there is nothing that we can't actually go towards. We shouldn't, stand back and say, I couldn't possibly do that. That British Reserve. It's about saying, well, how am I going to? And the most difficult things you learn to do in your life are walking and talking. And you do that when you're 2.
Yeah.
So after that, everything is downhill. There is absolutely nothing that should get in our way of that continual improvement through our lives. The thing that stops us is our belief in the lie that is I.
Again, I think you're completely right in that respect, and I think that there's also some. I suppose if I speak from a personal perspective, I think that there is this welcome sense of challenge when you look at a task in front of you and you go, currently, and it's because ultimately you have to be a realist in so many scenarios and go, if I put myself in the case of me going to be a principal at this point, the jump from where I'm at to where that is might not necessarily be, it's not to say it's unattainable, but certainly unrealistic in a shorter space of time. But I think what, as you maybe demonstrated with the way that your career progression happened, is that you were always thinking about what can I do next? And I don't think you ever at any point thought, well, I know I can't do this. But I think that concept of there being something where it's just not quite in your current skill set, that's actually a really, really motivating factor that can drive you forward, and has done certainly for yourself to get to where you are today.
And I think there's a terrible American phrase, which is feel the fear and do it anyway.
Yeah.
And I was approached when I was at SOAM to become the head of Year 11. And my mind had been, it's about the curriculum, it's about academic. And the idea of taking on a pastoral role was something which was very, very foreign. And part of that was my own personal thinking, that, I understand a bit about science, but the whole pastoral side of things was a real challenge. But I was stupid enough, you might say, to take that role on and think that would be interesting, and absolutely loved it. And after that, applied for a job as a pastoral deputy. And I'd never ever thought I would do that. I never thought it'd be something I'd enjoy. But in the same way as you get a buzz from leading students to enjoy your subject and have a motivation for it, when you then look at the pastoral side and you're looking at unlocking the things which are holding them back and overcoming the barriers, and then seeing the knock-on consequences for the whole person, that was again a really, really important bit of experience in terms of being able to do the job as a deputy and being able to do the job of the principal. Because if all you've done is academic, or if all you've done is pastoral, it's very difficult to have that role as a head of being able to balance up all of those different priorities.
Yeah. So obviously we've sort of had a little discussion around your current route into education, but interestingly, both you and I have come from the same area of the country, and in fact the same school, County Upper School in Bury St Edmunds. And I'm very fortunate that I'm able to look back on my experiences in county, and I look back on them really fondly. And I think that obviously partially to do with lessons, but also just general sort of understanding of how a school runs and how a school can be and what influence that can have on an individual. Would you say that there's any particular experiences from that time in your life that maybe played a role in creating an ethos or your general ethos to education? Or would you say that typically what you formulated as your opinion of what education could be actually came from your more higher education experiences?
No, I would say that my experience of the compulsory education was absolutely pivotal in shaping me as a person. But in a kind of a sort of the way in which the school wouldn't like to hear, in that there was an element, first of all, in growing up around County Upper School, was growing up on the Howard estate, so a council estate where there was high levels of unemployment and broken homes. Meant that I grew up with people who were very much the salt of the earth. My dad was a bricklayer, my mum didn't work. All of our neighbours were in that same situation. And school education really was the route by which you could escape from that. And it was a route in which you could actually aspire to go beyond what the normal expectations were. My experience of school was a relatively negative one, in that the type of learning was very much the teacher writing on a board and us copying it down. It was very controlled, it was very didactic in its approach, and part of my sort of feeling was that I felt I could do a better job than they were actually doing there. And there was one lesson when I was doing my A-level physics where for some reason the teacher couldn't be there and asked me if I would teach the lesson.
Did they
completely out of the blue, and I initially went, I can't teach the lesson, and I went, well, I can teach it better than you can. So I prepared the lesson, taught it, and was amazed at the fact that we actually had the students actually responded really positively. My own peers were actually responding to me, were stopping when I asked them to stop. And I wasn't a character who was, the really popular lad who was, head boy and thing like that at all. But the end of the experience of teaching that lesson, the feedback I got from my own class was that they'd enjoyed the lesson, that they'd learnt in the lesson, and it did plant that seed that there was some buzz I got out of that lesson that I didn't expect, and I guess it's given me that whole experience of being at County Upper School and growing up in Howard Estate has given me the passion to want to work with a fully comprehensive intake. That what I don't want is a school which is very middle class, where there's lots of aspiration. I do feel much more at home when it's people who've got a much broader spectrum of background, and the diversity of Netherhall is the thing that really attracts me, because there is need, and where there is the greatest need, there's the greatest opportunity for each day of your working career to be beneficial. So why would you choose to be at a straightforward school when you've got the opportunity of working at a school where there are challenges?
There's a complete parallel to what you've just described there around what Netherhall is, and actually it was one of the pivotal reasons why I applied here. Because I was doing my teacher training in Norwich, and as much as I did love each of the schools that I was in, as you have just described, it was very narrow in terms of the type of student that you were coming across. And I think that what we are exposed to as teachers and what the students are able to be exposed to in terms of different cultures, different backgrounds, different experiences, I think shape you to be a stronger, more well-rounded individual in so many regards than those that maybe are only going to be surrounded by those that are exactly like them. That was a really interesting experience at County, and I can imagine that really did have a significant shape on sort of your approach to becoming a teacher in the future years. And sort of connected into that really is, you have now obviously been in this role for a number of years, and you've done a fantastic job with a very difficult situation, certainly when you first came into the school. But what do you see in general your role as a principal being within a school environment?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I think the answer I would say is to carry water for everyone else. And I think the role of the principal, it's kind of like it's the base of the pyramid rather than the top. My role is to ensure that as much as possible, every other section of that pyramid can actually do their job most effectively. So it is one which is of real service, is the focus. I do have the power to affect change, and I do have the power to affect the working conditions and the ethos of the school. But what the role really is, in a nutshell, is about how you can support the education of the children through supporting everyone else. So, you could answer it's about setting the ethos, it's about doing the finance, it's about excluding students, it's about dealing with parents. But actually the whole thing is that it's about how you can use your position to positively affect the education of each student in the school and each member of staff.
And again, I think that's a really positive outlook to take on the role that you hold, because as you say, I think in so many regards, in maybe the public light, it's that the principal is the one that makes these top decisions and the things that are maybe more publicised, but realistically they play such a pivotal role in everything that almost they need to be the person that's supporting any way that they possibly can, and that is it's a significant role. And as we were talking before we were on the camera, is that it becomes a lifestyle. It's not just your 9 to 5 and then you get to your 6 weeks holidays and then it's all over. It's something that carries forward all the way through the experience, really. And I think that ties in really quite nicely to thinking about your job role and your description of a job role, essentially, because with any, I've mentioned this to a couple of other people that I've had conversations with, but when it comes to reading a job description, it will tell you a certain amount of things and you go, okay, well, that's roughly what my job will be. But as soon as you enter that job, there's so many other components that really you weren't ever going to be able to know were a thing until you're part of it. So from your perspective, what have been some of the things that you've taken on as a job role that you've actually come to learn to really, really love? And what are the components to your job that have actually provided more of a challenge than maybe you anticipated when going into that role?
Yeah, I think it is the whole breadth of the role is the thing which surprises you when you go in. And you're right, when you look at a job description, you look at it, you assess whether you're capable of doing those things, and you've got a fair idea that that looks pretty manageable. Within about 3 hours of your first day, you recognise that job description could be a winner of the Booker Prize, because it is pure fiction, and actually what you are doing is needing to have 360-degree vision of what's going on in the school, what's going on outside of the school, the political side of things, the individual social side of things. So it really, everything surprises you. And the interrelatedness of everything surprises you. But I think that's one of the great things about having the privilege of running a school, that it becomes part of your life. It isn't discrete. It isn't that you finish at any time in day. It isn't that you stop at 8 o'clock in the evening or you stop at the weekends. And actually that's brilliant, because it's about your personality. And my personality is I am restless. I do really enjoy the work that I do, and it's not a work-life balance. There just is a single life, and it just is. I really feel very, very fortunate, very lucky that the job I do doesn't feel like I have to put on any act, doesn't feel like I have to try to be a person that I'm not. That my decisions can be very based on principle, because it just is how I really do feel. So, I have been surprised by some of the things I've had to do, You know, some of the things which, you know, are very workaday, like painting arrows on the ground last summer to organise the one-way system, and going around with a template and a spray can during the holidays.
Well, I'm not going to lie. You seem like you were having a great time.
It was
you were
one
holding
of my
up
favourite. I felt real satisfaction of a job well done at the end of each one of those arrows. Down to then having to speak to people from MPs and government, and, you know, newspapers, the media. All of those things which, you know, I'm not naturally somebody who puts myself in those sort of areas, but it is just such a variety. You know, there is no day that goes slowly. There is no Monday that I don't look forward to. There is no weekend I look forward to. It's all part of the same continuation. I'm never counting down the days to a holiday. It just is it is a passion where, you know, I would not like to have 6 weeks off in the summer, because that'd be like saying that's like the football season ending and there being no friendlies.
Yeah, very
true. That you want to look forward, you want that continuation of the sport. You can't wait for the season to start again, and, you know, everything you can get in between time to, you know, even if it's watching, you know, OAP's five-a-side on Sky, you want to take the opportunity because it's football. And it's the same with education, that there is that overriding belief that it does release students and it releases their potential, and it's the way to bring about social change.
I mean, the passion for your profession here radiates, because I think, yeah, you're so right in the way that how your lifestyle has to work as someone in this particular role, that if as soon as you start to separate it and you go, oh, I can't wait for these 6 weeks off, almost that becomes something that in some regard is going to limit you and the ways that you can support the school, because it is such a challenging but rewarding profession, and it does require, you know, a lot of commitment from regardless of what role or position that you take within a school environment. So in that sense then, how do you judge your own success as a principal? Because it's such a multifaceted experience, must be hard to judge that in some regards.
It's really, really easy. That I judge my success by evaluating the last interaction I've had. And that's it. You know, there is no long-term aspiration. There is no, when we get to this grading, we'll have done it when I get this number of grades. It's about looking back, the last interaction I've had with a member of staff, with a parent, with a student. If I can look back and say, I feel I was, you know, true to myself and true to the philosophy of the school, which is shared by the school, then I've been successful as a principal. And if I look back and I say, I didn't do that particularly well, then success is learning from that and reflecting and judging and doing it differently the next time. So it's really quite short term that I haven't got a brain big enough to work on the big scale of things. It's very much the immediate. And, you know, I do believe, and I say in some assemblies that during a day if you have two people, you have situations during the day where two people, they come together for a very short period of time and then they move away. And in that moment, there is an opportunity. And there's only two opportunities you've got. You can either build relationship or you can break relationship. You can't be neutral. That when you're going past somebody, if you say hello to them, you smile, you're building. If you ignore, if you're short with them, you're breaking it down. And we know from psychology that you need 9 positive things to each negative just to stay level. And if you can go through a day, and if we can get a school where students are thinking about those interactions, and every interaction making it one where they're building, they have got the power there to bring about real change in people. So I think it's a very simple philosophy.
I think it's an important philosophy though, because it really takes actually a lot of roots in the concept of mindfulness. And it's about really being very present with each and every experience that you have. And I think certainly in the scenario which you're in, it's a very high pressured situation, you know. And even as I was waiting to sort of come in to have a conversation with you, 3-4 people sort of piling in, asking questions. And yeah, I think you're so right in that sense, that if you look too wide for your sense of success, sometimes you forget to realize that actually there's success that's happening with every scenario that's happening in front of you.
Yeah.
Sort of linked into that concept of you know, being very, very busy in the sense of being a principal. But obviously you took your start as a science teacher, and I think that probably your experience now as a principal is probably very different to maybe what it was as you were, say, for example, in NQT.
Yes.
But linked into it, so what would you say would be, you know, what do you really miss about full-time teaching?
I grieve the loss of being a teacher, the creativity of planning and seeing the impact of your planning on students, seeing students, you know, enjoying the lesson, looking forward to coming, and particularly when you're teaching physics and people come in with the perspective of, you know, physics is either accelerating a subatomic particle to near light speed or it's ice melting in a bucket. And in schools it tends to be ice melting in a bucket. And the idea of you know, taking things which can be very black and white and making them interesting and making them stimulating, and then seeing the wonder with students when you drop in little bits like, do you realise, you know, when you see the sun set, the sun actually set 8 minutes before you saw the last rays coming over because of the distance to the sun and the time it takes to travel there. And the fact that we can see behind the sun because of the gravitational effect of the sun. And you get these kids, you know, looking at you and just going, that's amazing. Then you talk about the size of the universe, the stars, and then you go into the molecular level. And you talk about the fact that 99.9% of matter is a vacuum. And actually, in reality, we don't exist. In practical terms, if you round us up to the nearest percentage, our percentage of matter is 0. And all of these things that make you stand back and lift yourself from, you know, we tend to live our life within the 6 feet from our feet to our head. And yet there's a universe out there and there's a universe in there. And the opportunity of being able to open up that wonder of what is all around us, and the rapport you have with the students that you get to know and build relationship with, I really do grieve the loss of that experience. But I had 23 years of it, of really enjoying it, and the opportunity I've got now is to have potentially a more profound impact, albeit in a very different way.
Sure. I completely resonate with what you're saying about the opportunities and experiences that you can give to young people, and especially if you're working in a department that share the same values as you and are as motivated as you are to truly come up with innovative and just spectacular ways of presenting the information that students can go on to utilise and influence for the rest of their lives, really.
I think the thing is that every child is interested in everything, but they don't necessarily realise it. And it only takes some questions. I mean, the number of children I've had coming to my lessons who say, I hate science, and then discover that they do love it. And it's not anything magic that I've done. It's the fact that you just explain the process and the question. You pose the questions. You know, you're putting them out of balance, and you're leaving them out of balance, and they always want to right themselves. And by creating that sort of conflict within their minds, where they want to know the answer, they then come towards you rather than you pushing information on them. You know, you'll drop something in then, you know, like saying, well, you know, that would happen if you did that, wouldn't you? Because electricity, you know, runs in this way, or electricity doesn't actually flow down a wire. And then you leave it, and they come back and they go, what do you mean electricity doesn't flow down a wire?
And then you've got
and you go, well, you don't think electricity flows down a wire, do you? And they go, well, yes, of course it does. It goes from one side to the other. I say, well, what do you think's moving then? And then this conversation starts, and you know, you see this realization of kids going, wow, you know, I didn't realize that happened. So, you know, so how come birds can sit on an electricity wire and not get electrocuted?
Yeah.
And they're going, I don't know why. I say, well, that's a very good question.
Yeah.
And you've got them coming towards you, and there is no subject that children aren't interested in, but there is teaching which children aren't interested in. And
Certainly.
we have to teach children the way they learn. They won't learn the way in which we teach.
Well, that's, I think, the real pivotal point of that is it needs to be presented in a way that's relevant to their life and their own experiences and things that they've come across before and things that they will need to not necessarily even know about, but have an interest in going forward in later life. And yeah, really pivotal in the way in which that's presented to an individual or a particular student or class. And with that in mind, obviously, the concept of teaching and the way in which we have taught, especially when we think about how we've had to adjust to online remote teaching, beyond not necessarily just the COVID window itself, but how would you say that the role of a teacher has maybe changed over the last 5 years?
Yeah, I think it's become a lot more interesting, and actually I think it's become a lot better. I think, there's always people saying about, education is worse now than it was before. I disagree. I think that young people are better now than they've ever been before, and I think the role of teaching is better. And I hate to give credit to Ofsted, but here I have to, that the most recent update to Ofsted of the focus being upon the school developing the curriculum, the school considering the context that it's in, the opportunities in the area, the creativity to be freed from a set curriculum, means that there is now an opportunity to say to faculty, look, we want you to develop an inspiring curriculum for our students. And we are increasingly freed from the amount of work in terms of marking, assessments that we were placed under in the past. And again, it's very difficult. You ask a teacher about what's the worst thing about the job, and they will talk about the paperwork. Well, paperwork is nothing now compared to what it used to be. When I came into teaching as an NQT, it was a national curriculum with 17 different units you had to fill with assessment objectives for each one you had to tick off. It was an absolute impossibility to deliver it, but we were all trying to deliver the impossible, and the amount of paperwork was far greater than it is now. I think now it's very illuminated that there are many schools taking alternative approaches to marking. There's a significant reduction in data that's been taken in there. There's a reduction in requirements for reporting. There's a much bigger focus upon relationship and pedagogy. So I think it's really positive the way things are going.
I think that you touch on the concept of relationship there, because certainly from my perspective, I think that's been one of the most significant changes within a teacher's role, simply because of the sheer complexity of the way that students understand themselves at this point, and actually how, as a teacher, you have to navigate that. And certainly when it comes to your planning now, obviously, your focus is on what is the content, but it's now you actually have to look around that and go, okay, well, for this particular lesson, I've got this student, and I know that this student needs to do this in order to be able to do that, and I can't do that because it's the Thursday or something like that. And sort of in line with that, do you think that maybe the teacher's role has expanded beyond the concept of maybe what its root was, its principle of pedagogy, and that actually it's maybe more in the role, more of a societal role in some regard? Yeah,
and I think, when I was teaching science, often you would be asked in social occasions, what do you do? And, I'd say I'm a teacher, and they would say, what do you teach? And I would say, children. And what they'd say, no, I mean, which subject? And I went, no, it's irrelevant. The subject is just a vehicle for dealing with children. And I think that is very much the way now, that none of us are truly teachers of our subjects. We are teachers of children. And we're achieving something much, much bigger than the delivery of a curriculum which is written on paper. Because, I did history O-level at school. I can't remember anything of that. But my teacher, actually for history, Mr. Davis, was really, really inspiring. And he taught me an awful lot about being a teacher and being a person and being somebody I respected. So it wasn't the history that stuck with me, it was a person, the impact it had on my life.
And you often hear that from most people, to be honest. It's that they will bring up the names of a particular individual or a class, but if you maybe ask them a principle of what was learnt within that time, although that might have influenced them to take a pathway within education, it might not necessarily have, really that particular factoid stuck with them all the way through. But just keeping a focus slightly on the actual curriculum itself, because again, society has changed so much, even in the space of the last set of years. Do you feel that the way that the curriculum is and its structure, do you think it's suitable for students in the 21st century?
I think it's getting there. And again, I think that the flexibility that's increasing is helping. I think it's got further to go. I think examinations are a hindrance to that, in that many countries which have got very high educational standards, there aren't terminal assessments, because I think they do limit the freedom of expression and development of students, and it can become the aim is getting through the curriculum rather than building the child. Yeah. So I think it is much better. But actually, I think, with the last couple of years and the teacher assessed grades, I can't help feeling that it's been a better way of assessing students by the teachers teaching them than a terminal experience in an exam hall. Yeah. Where it is about working under pressure. Yeah,
well, we'll touch on that a little bit when we come into what's been the case for the last year and a half, really, because I think that's a really pivotal conversation to have. But coming now back onto maybe the teachers themselves and the general well-being of an individual, because obviously, as we've mentioned on so many occasions here, that it's a really extremely rewarding profession to be in, simply because of the scenarios and the experiences that we're able to impart on other people. But as with any job, there are some significant challenges that are in place there. And, in your role as a principal, and also in relation to your own self, because I think that's important to consider as well. But sort of what ways do you encourage and motivate the people that work for you, whilst bearing in mind their general mental health?
I think it's by doing it the other way round. I think it's the fact that that people in education are not in it for the money, they're not in it for the glory, they're in it because there is a buzz that they get for being with the students and causing a change. Sometimes people get jaded and they forget that. And I think, it's reminding them of the reasons why they went into education. I think you put well-being first. I think you don't try to motivate people and look after their well-being. You look after their well-being and their intrinsic motivation. You remind them of the intrinsic motivation. You catch them when they are, you're celebrating what they're doing. You're trying to make sure that any success, any glory, any congratulations goes to the person, not to the school, so that they feel built up. So I think that's a central thing that we've been learning actually through the last 2 years. So kind of going a bit into the COVID situation, that the well-being surveys of the staff have been central to the decision making that we've been carrying through. And you want to release the internal motivation of the staff rather than directing them to follow a series of activities that you've ordained. So I think it is staff will be motivated naturally. They're in the job. They love working with students. If we can remove barriers to the things which are causing the pressure, then we get variety of outcome. We get people with their personalities shining through. We don't want a workforce where everyone is the same. Everyone, consistency is good in some reasons. Consistency is terrible in others. I would really like a workforce who are increasingly motivated and unique in their personalities, and then what the children receive is that full spectrum of an experience of education, not just a rigorously delivered traditional curriculum.
Yeah, by robots, really. Yeah. Every individual has a personality that can contribute in ways that another person can't in some regard. What would you say, just as maybe as an example? Obviously you speak about the wellbeing survey. Is there maybe a particular example you could give that maybe you implemented as a result of feedback from staff?
There's all sorts. I mean, I've got an ongoing record of every one of the surveys, how the figures have changed as we've gone through, what steps have been taken after each survey to make a difference. So it's been some small things, requests, people asking for coffee and tea to be located around the school, and putting that in place. It's been supporting people in terms of the rotas that they were on. It's about the setting up of WhatsApp groups. It's about, there are some big sort of images coming through and trying to judge when it's right to do things and when it's not. But then it's also the fact that with the wellbeing surveys, we set it up deliberately to be anonymous, i.e. that we would know the names of the people who wrote those surveys. I had to set aside a morning, each morning, to look through those and read every person, take that person, read all of their answers, and then colour code them about which ones were positive, which were fine, which was just reinforcement of the things we were doing well, then to change into an orange colour, the ones where concerns are raised. And then I would have to go to that person and make contact with them and address those areas so I could turn it green and actually get rid of those oranges. And it was a long process to actually do, particularly at the beginning, where there was lots of anxiety. But actually, on those individual elements, what it was saying to the person is, what you're saying really is valuable, really is important to me, how you're feeling in these situations. I think you put one in about the CCTV camera.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring that up.
At the PE department. And, you look at it, you consider, and you go, that actually is a really good shout, then I haven't got a monopoly on good ideas. I don't even have a tiny monopoly on it. It's gathering from everyone. But it also means that when people see that you've taken that response, they feel that they are taken into account. I don't want people to ever say that they couldn't come along to my office and just say, I've had an idea about, or can you explain why you're doing that? Because I'm not precious about it. And so
you very recently did, I think it might have even been, yesterday, because obviously not to really dive into it, but when we spoke about sort of the financial situations of anything, and you were very clear in saying that, on top of having the meeting about it, it's that if you feel like you need to raise any concerns or you want to have a conversation about some justifications, my door is always open, which is just real special.
And I've already had visits.
I bet. Well, I want to come back to the CCTV thing, because it's interesting you said that, because I was actually going to mention it. CCTV around the school site, it I think has been a positive thing. I think it's allowed for certain things to be able to happen and provide support in certain ways. But that also makes me sort of think a little bit around discipline in general. And what would you say is sort of your approach to this? Because I think, even the sense of discipline, it's harsh in nature in some sense, but what is your approach to behaviour management? I think is maybe a better way of phrasing it.
Okay, I mean it's a loaded question. It's a loaded question, but it's a very interesting one, because it's an interesting parallel. That did you realise that in the UK it's not against the law to murder? There is no law that says you shall not murder, unless you're following the Ten Commandments. What there is a tariff for murder. There is actually, there is a statement. There's an exchange that goes on that if you commit murder, you will then have a minimum sentence of this particular thing. It's a transaction, and this idea that you do something, there's a transaction. And we know that people, who fall foul of the law do tend to reoffend afterwards. That even with that problem at the end, that punishment, does that punishment mean that they go, cool, I did that and I ended up going to jail for 1 year. I'm never going to do that again. No, we don't see that. We see a recurrence of that behaviour. My worry about schools taking a zero tolerance approach is that behaviours become transactional. It becomes if you swear at a teacher, you get suspended for a day. And you kind of might weigh that up and go, well, it's worth it then. It's just a transaction. I can swear at a teacher, and what happens is I'll get a day out. Great. Is it going to stop you doing it again? Probably not.
Probably not, yeah.
So there is a sort of vicarious, pleasure that teachers might get from saying that child has been punished. I'm not convinced it is punishment. In the same way that exclusion from school, it's a response, and I'm not sure it's punishment. So that whole punitive approach, I feel, is inherently flawed. And also that when we see poor behaviours among students, they are distressed behaviours. They tend not to be malicious. They tend not to be motivated from pure evil. They tend to be, the behaviours of students who are distressed and are trying to work out their scenarios in a way which they can. And they in some cases, I don't want to be negative about this, but if you get an animal that's been mistreated, they're likely to bite you.
Yeah.
And if you have children who have been through very, very challenging circumstances, they're not going to behave in a typical way that you go to. So it's my sort of really strong belief about this is it is all about relationship. It's all about the role of a teacher is to be the adult, to be able to step back from ourselves and to take the mindful approach of stepping out of the river and looking at it separately and realising that the student who is being offensive to you, they aren't actually being offensive to you, they are unburdening themselves of the things that they're carrying. What we need to make sure that we are doing is building those deep, trusting relationships with students for whom we may be the only adult who offers them that. And that way we can really change, we may not affect their grades, but we can absolutely change their perspectives. We can get them to grow in respect. We can move them to a position where you can affect them. And it's kind of like, how do you get on a runaway train? That if there's a train that's going along a track and it's going along at 40 miles an hour and you run up to the train, so if this is the train, you're running up to it and you try to jump on board, you might jump through the gap of the doorway, but the train hitting you will kill you. Mm. If you want to jump on a train, you've got to run alongside it and you've got to get as close as you can to the speed it's going at. Then you can hop on board, then you can get to the front, then you can slowly apply the brakes. And with students, it's that same situation. We try to go to a child who's in crisis and jump on board straight away. There's just going to be a collision. But if we actually are standing back and are gaining rapport and speaking in a way which actually initially starts mirroring them and then works backwards once we've got rapport, we can actually get students whereby they build relationship, and that, compared to saying you're excluded, they come back and nothing has changed except they hate you more.
Yeah.
Whereas you take the time, you treat them the way in which you want to. So it's slow, it's long. It isn't what lots of people outside cry out for. Why can't you sort out the bully? Why can't you deal with them? As if there was a straightforward way of actually doing it. And it's at the best it's painting over the cracks and they just come back again. To affect real change and to have a real cultural growth in a school takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes resilience and stamina.
Yeah.
And I think behaviours, when you bring up your own child, you've got that whole childhood to shape them, and you're with them so much time over that time, and even then you get it wrong. With students, we get them 5 hours a day, and we've got to actually go against the other 19 hours. We have 25 hours a week, there's 168 hours in the whole week. We're a tiny element of their lives, but the effect we can have is absolutely profound. Yeah. So I think that it is a real steer away from the simplistic zero tolerance, the more you punish them, chuck them out of the school. And I often feel that there is some criticism that comes towards me from some parents about the approaches that we take. But my experience of seeing those approaches used is that it's much more beneficial than just the black and white. But But even I'm conscious that it's also very difficult often for staff to recognise why it is that things are being done, which is why we have invested in the pivotal techniques of training and getting Lee Parry to do the leading of it. So we don't just buy in something, we develop somebody in the school who can lead it.
Yeah, it's the culture that
and it becomes cultural.
Yeah, I think in the concept of relationships, I think is again the point to really pick up there, because certainly from my own experiences as a PE teacher, I think for a PE teacher, the difference that we have is that we have a physical space, a physical environment where students can move around, and the way that you interact with students is slightly different to moving in uniform fashion down a classroom environment. And what I've noticed is that with some of your more typically challenging students, the way that you're then able to interact and build those relationships, that is what allows them to be successful in that environment. And if it's that your instant go-to is to as you say, sort of meet them coming in a different direction and just hit them, it's never going to work. And I think the challenge that teachers have in this scenario is, as you say, because it requires the consistency and it requires hard work, and you in so many scenarios have some very, very challenging students to deal with and behaviours to deal with. But it's, as you say, being the adult, being the person that knows where they stand in that relationship, and being that consistent person for the hours that we have them, and then hoping that in some way will transform what is maybe going on in the hours outside of the school time.
And it's also owning that we get it wrong.
Yes.
There's nothing as effective to say to a child afterwards, look, I just want to apologise for the way in which I responded there. I've just got it wrong. We're all human. Let's start again. And that's modelling some really, really good, philosophies for how we actually see ourselves. And you just keep on reiterating that, our job is to support the student. Whatever happens, we keep on doing that. They've got a part to play themselves. But again, it's messy, but how boring would it be if the job was straightforward? How boring would it be if you were going in, everybody did exactly what you said and everybody was hardworking? Things get messy in education. You've got to really enjoy the messy bits, because there's nothing as good as unravelling a piece of string and seeing it all pulled out straight. It's frustrating at the time, but the messy bits are the bits that we should be really relishing.
Yeah. And speaking of messy bits, COVID.
Yeah.
So we, over the last year, as a profession, as an entire world, really, have gone through something that is unprecedented. It's something that you wouldn't know what was going to happen from day to day, and it was so interesting being part of so many of our staff briefings, because it really was right. What is the case today? What is being told about this scenario? What's going to happen here? And there was just what's so great about it, and because I'm part of it, is the way that so many teachers, SLT, anyone that was in a school-based environment, the way that they rallied together to create a provision that allowed students to survive through something that none of us had ever survived through before, with provisions that were being made up as we went along. And one thing that I would love to bring out with what we did here at this school was the Raspberry Pis. The being able to raise 10,000. I don't know what the end total was. £11,500 to support the more disadvantaged students who didn't have access to any form of technology at home, and giving them the opportunity to access what we were doing at school. And I mean, that is just, I think, is testament to maybe what realistically a very small space can do for so many people in really challenging backgrounds. That is maybe just one example of a scenario that was had to be dealt with in a time like that. But what were, from your perspective, some of the biggest challenges that we faced in this profession as a result of a pandemic? And I'll maybe limit you to, let's say, a couple, because I think you could list for days, I think.
Yeah, and I think it actually, I won't list. I would just say that it's a paradigm shift. Everything that we knew about education, everything we knew about our practice, was almost within 24 hours turned upside down. All of the knowledge we had of what the shape of the year was going to be suddenly became a stepping into darkness. And there was an instant sort of level of helplessness and just really not knowing what the next step was. But with that vulnerability has come some amazing gains in that, yes, we raised money for computers, but actually I think a bigger impact was the message to the community, the way in which all sorts of people from around the community rallied to the support. Some incredibly touching comments, some amazing, people just giving £500 and just saying that they wanted to do it. Little old ladies coming round to my house in Bury and giving me an iPad to take into school because they'd heard about what was actually happening and wanting to give their iPad to a student who was doing it. The way in which that affects us going forward, I just thought was there are so many things to be grateful for about the pandemic, because it has been a reset.
It has.
And there has been a position whereby communities have supported each other, and it's allowed us, as a school, to break down hierarchical barriers. I really don't like the whole sort of hierarchy thing, and the fact that there was key worker schools, and there was people from the senior leadership team to the TAs playing table tennis with the kids in the atrium hall. It was a real leveller, and we were all in that position of being in need. And it's a terrible thing to be independent.
Yeah.
In that we want to become increasingly interdependent, and that this whole thing is that it's not about what we can achieve ourselves. It's much better if we can achieve less together. And I think what we got through the pandemic was that we have a staff where everything that we did together. Nothing that we did I have to twist anyone's arm? Did I have to apply any pressure? When we asked for volunteers to come in during the Easter holidays, there was no shortage. There was no requirement for anyone to go against what they wanted to do. We had loads of people saying, please use me. When we asked for people to go to another school to support, over half the staff contact me and say, I'm willing to do whatever is needed to do.
I think this is really, from my perspective, the whole concept of with serotonin, that concept of community and how important it is to be able to rally together to support one another in so many different ways. And you're so right. When the moments of supporting key workers or vulnerable students, I instantly signed up, because as you said with the hierarchical comment, you would go into the space of where students were learning, and you were able to just talk to them about what they were doing regardless of what subject it was, and building a certain different type of relationship. And then, as you say, you'd go into a space and you had people from the canteen, people work at the lunch ladies, you would have people from finance, you would have teachers, you would have students all coming together. And because the experience was shared, that none of us had done it before, there was this sense of innocence and sense of just, I don't really know how to describe it. It was just this sense of unity that came together. And as you said, with people coming in from the community, it's inspiring, really, because it just shows you that as much as we like to think about it, we are unified. There are so many members of our community that want to do the right thing and want to help however they can.
Yeah, and I think it's increasingly like that, and it's because the philosophy of the school is built upon the people in the school, and that there hasn't been a academy transformation of a mission statement enforced upon the school. Even now, over the last 6 months, we've been building our key priorities for next year, which has involved parents, which has involved student surveys, it's been involved staff, it's involved SLT, the governors. And what we're going to be presenting is something in September, which I really believe everybody will look at and go, that's us. That's us squared. That's us at the next level. The things that we hold dear to, the things that motivate us, we want to do more of that. And it's not about any Ofsted criteria. is not what things do you have to do to be outstanding. It's how can we be the best school we can be for our students.
Yeah.
Which is a real driving. That's really exciting. That we don't want to be pursuing limited goals. We want to be dreaming of what the school could be, but it becomes deeper of what it actually is at the moment.
Well, touching on this concept of maybe looking wider and the way in which we can support students, we touched on very briefly the concept of what exams are at the moment, and with the way that COVID happened and the way that influenced the world of education, exams were cancelled, and it led to set or tags as they're referred to within the school environment. What do you think that the cancellation of exams has taught us about maybe over-reliance on potentially exams, and what would you like to see maybe going forward, the approach that we take around assessment in general, more formalised assessment?
And first thing I would say is that in the old traditional model, when we came in the day before the exam results day and we saw the results, I think the general experience of teachers is you look at the results that students have got and you go, yeah, that's about right. That's what I thought they'd get. Now, if you can do that, it's telling you there's no need for exams. If you're not surprised by what the students do and you're pretty sure at the end about what they're going to get, then they didn't need to sit those exams in the first place. So in the old world, you kind of needed to have good memory. You needed to learn lots of facts. You don't now. You can Google things. You can look up, you can research things really, really easily. It's what we do with knowledge. It's how we treat knowledge as provisional in nature, and we question and we think about it and we become divergent in our thinking. Exams prevent that. They limit the learning. They ask you to keep on practicing a particular technique rather than exploring the questions that arise from it. And I think our education system is good, but if you release the shackles, which is caused by the examination system, you can still have grading. I would prefer the tag process to be the process that it just stays in an absolute level. But then you've got the opportunity to take students on a journey which is led by their motivation. You don't say, I know you're really loving this topic, but now we're going to do this one, which is really boring. You can follow that, you can explore it, you can develop their thinking. And it is about that whole thing of, when I grew up, if you read it in the paper, it was true because it was written in the paper. And if it said it in a book when I was at university, we were kind of programmed that if it says it in a book, it's true. And we know now that the world we're living in, the world of fake news, and whether things actually are true. I heard somebody describe something as a future truth, that rather than it being a lie, they said, it is true, but it's just not true yet, was their answer, a future truth. And it is that ability for people to look at something and to recognise that it is an interpretation, it is somebody's belief on things, and it's about looking around questions. The way that the British education system really does do well against other countries is the fact that the Far Eastern countries have students who have very, very high attainment levels, but creativity is low. What I would like to see is a much greater focus upon creativity. The Pride Pledge, which we're launching again in September, to me is absolutely central. Every child should be involved in extracurricular. Every child should be exploring avenues they haven't explored before. Not because there's anything inherently good in basketball, although of course there is. Not that there's something inherently good in learning to play the cello, but all of those different activities just shape you as a person. And who knows what the occupations of our students are going to be. We know they're not going to be traditional. Given that we don't know what they're going to be, but we know that they're not going to be traditional, why would we go through the same Industrial Revolution sort of process of 1871 Education Act, learning of history, and the Govian EBAC, and this focus on the Commonwealth, and I feel that there's lots of dangers in that approach and lots of opportunity, But we're halfway there with the Ofsted model now. We're halfway there to realising it.
I think that you're again so right on that sense. What I perceive a school environment, you know, how many scenarios in your life can you say that you're surrounded by, you know, from a student's perspective, so many people of a similar age, and the way in which you could interact. I feel that there is still more that can be explored in that sense. And ultimately, you know, it's perceived that the best way to help direct the next pathway through education is that form of assessment. But as you say, there's so much more to learn, just lifelong learning or commitment to lifelong learning, than there is for, you know, what you're going to basically be judged on in the space of a four-week window. And there is always going to be value in, you know, some form of assessment, but the question is, how is that assessment being applied, and how are the students perceiving that assessment?
Yes, what's the assessment for?
Yeah.
If it's just for measuring, it's pointless.
Yeah.
If it's for reflection, evaluation, and readdressing it, you know, you want kids to be focusing on education as that, you know, in their life they want to not be looking at financial gain, but gain experience. You know, that it's not about you're doing education so you can get a good job, you can have lots of money. It's about what experiences can you have on the way through, what sort of richness of life can you have, which are very, very different things. And the world is telling students it's about being celebrity. It's about having the big car, it's having the big house, it's having, you know, it's winning the lottery. It's that is what we are seeing paraded in front of us on the internet. And it's just a lie in terms of satisfaction. You know, I couldn't be happy if I was a millionaire. It wouldn't change that process. You know, I've often said to my children, if I won the lottery, I would then go back to school the next day. I wouldn't give up the job. I couldn't. You know, I would be able to invest in the school myself. No way I could finish working. You know, that would be the worst thing possible to do. I can't imagine anything worse. So it is about, you know, education going forward. There are so many opportunities, and it can sound like a really, really big deal and almost unattainable. But the fact is that when I see young teachers interacting with students, I see you and Molly interacting with the students, you go, that's it. That's the value. You know, and those the extraordinary is the ordinary. It's not the sweeping gesture. It's the small, quiet, sensitive, positive word that you give to a student that affects them deeply, that changes the world. You know, it sounds grandiose, but it's not. It's the tiny little things which are the things that really make the difference.
Which comes back to your whole mentality towards how you approach your job, and that it's the small interactions, jumping from one to the other, being mindful about what's going on in front of you. And I mean, I think with an ethos like that I mean, you certainly need to be in the position that you're currently in. And you know, I'm fortunate enough to be in a school where I can say, you know, it's been an absolute pleasure watching you work over the last set of years, because everything is so deep rooted in supporting students and staff in the best way possible, without it becoming something that, you know, ultimately it's a burden in any way. It becomes something that you want to be a part of, and that's really, really important. So again, you know, only credit to you in that sense.
Thank you.
So I mean, I think it's important that we sort of tie this up a little bit, because I mean, it's been an absolutely fantastic conversation, and quite honestly, I could have probably kept on going for hours. There's so many other questions that I could have asked, but I'll finish with a couple with you.
Yep.
So obviously, coming from a background of a PE teacher, and you know, someone who's just generally, you know, involved in physical activity and loves physical activity, you know, how important do you perceive physical activity to be for staff and students?
Oh, it is just hugely important, and that, you know, you don't buy a Ferrari and don't get it serviced, you know, and you don't leave it in the garage. You know, it just doesn't work. You don't get a Formula One car and put unleaded petrol in it. You know, it's about we are blessed by having, you know, a body and, you know, a spirit which needs certain things. And, you know, just from an evolutionary standpoint, you know, we weren't born to sit in an office. We were born to be active. And the positive benefits of physical exercise are so high. which is why one of the first things we did when we came into Netherhall was determine that the one unchangeable thing in the school curriculum was that though there was a requirement of 1 hour PE per week, 2 hours per week would be our absolute minimum. And that wasn't going to be changed. With all the curriculum reform we looked at, that was an absolute, there was no way that was going to shift. And I really do believe that if people are physically active, then they are in a much better mental position for dealing with it. And all the issues, all the health issues in life, all the issues on society, of obesity, is actually taking away the opportunity that we have to do great things as a country. So, it's always going to be central to the belief of what education should be in schools.
And I think from a mental health perspective, because I must make reference to Friday night football with staff. Ever since, we came back, because ultimately, I know what physical, not just football, I look much wider than that, but physical activity, I know what that can do for students, but even what it's done for myself on a Friday, being able to have that release and being able to get together with other members of staff, it's life-changing is a strong word, but from someone who came from such a sporting background, being able to have that release back in there again, I think it's so special and just shows the power of physical activity.
And it's a real leveller. The fact that you've got different ages, different weights, very, very different ability levels, and it is the fact that we can all get there at the end of the day. That there's no sort of standing on ceremony. It just is a genuine bit of entertainment
just
at the end of the week. I experienced the opposite. I slipped my disc when I was in my 30s, and that meant I couldn't. At the time, I was running several miles a week. I was doing sport. I was playing squash. And I had a few injuries, which meant I had to stop for a considerable period of time. And that was really hard. That was a really low point for me in terms of my mental health, of dealing with that inability to sort of get out of myself. And makes me experience all the more now the importance of that exercise and the well-being of staff. And it comes in all sorts of different shapes and forms. But without the physical side of it, I think we are selling ourselves short.
I agree. So I will be seeing you at Friday football.
You will.
And just one last question to ask you. And again, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been exactly what I knew it would be, because we've had conversations before, and it's always fascinating hearing you sort of put forward your passion for education. So yeah, again, thank you so much. But to finish, if you had the magic wand and you had the choice of being able to impact or change one component of education, what would that be? As big or as small as you like. I'll leave the reins over to you.
I think it probably would be that it would be the exams. It would be the freedom. Education is for life. It's for something which shapes us going through. And the requirement for education is different for each student. So I think the whole focus at the moment on EBAC and on... There are certain things we need to be able to do. We all need to be able to add up. We need arithmetic. We need to be able to write. We need to be able to read. Beyond that, I think there is a whole range of different opportunities that students would have. So I would like the opportunity to have a much broader curriculum, whereby students had a curriculum which matched their aspirations, which matched their skills, which valued the practical and the creative and the physical as much as the academic, that gave everybody a right to have the baseline foundations, but didn't impose barriers on their own creativity. I think we can move towards that now, but schools have to be courageous to decide that they are going to not make certain subjects compulsory and to stand on the ground. We have, as a school, said that we are not going to be a school which says that a language is compulsory. And we don't believe it's right to take subjects off the curriculum. Some schools have taken off art from the curriculum. If somebody wants to study music and art and drama, I think they should have the opportunity to do that. The restrictions on us are the sort of expectations, the league tables which measure us against the Progress 8 characteristics is a balance, but one thing you will never have heard me talk about in school and in a staff meeting is about Progress 8. You'll never have heard me talk about the residuals of a subject. You'll never have heard me talk about borderline students and how we should give a focus on them. It just doesn't register, because I really don't believe in that as the form of education. And if you ever find me doing it, you're to stop me and to slap me around the face and tell me to stop it doing straight away. But
Can I get that in writing?
Yeah, I think it is that the ability, and there are so many things which I would love to do here and to introduce, which are things which I'm trying to find ways of doing. But we are restricted financially, and we're restricted just in terms of the facilities. It's not putting me off. There are irons in the fire. There are projects which are underway to try to sort of move it in that direction. But it's going against the tide. And what I would like to see is a more openness on government to allow us to express what the students actually need, rather than fitting their idea of what schools are producing for the economy of the future.
Well, I think I can be certain in saying that your influence on education, I think, is only just getting started. And I mean, through every topic that we've spoken about there, it's clear that there is just a sense of passion and a sense of that, we're going to keep moving forward regardless of the barriers and whatever challenges come our way. So it's really is inspiring stuff, and I'm really glad to be able to share with more people, what can go on in an education-based environment, because often, like in any scenario, you will see in the media or the news a perspective of what is going on and how things function. But when you really come in and you see how things work and the commitment and the motivation of not just yourself but anyone that works around you, you know that education is in fantastic hands, and let's hope that sort of continues in the future. So again, Chris, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
It's been absolutely fantastic. And if you want to watch any more content like this, please follow us on Instagram. It's at serotonin_sessions, or you can find us on YouTube. But for now, I hope you have a lovely week, and we'll see you later on.